I was holding a photograph of a woman I barely remembered when I found out I had been robbed of everything. Not robbed in the way you think, not by a stranger in the night, but by family, by blood, by someone who smiled at funerals and shook hands at the lawyer's office while I slept on a squeaky mattress behind orphanage walls. The ranch was worth hundreds of millions, they told me later, but when I was 17, I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know that beneath the soil my grandmother had walked on, there were minerals and water rights that companies would kill for. I didn't know that while I folded donated clothes and ate watery soup, my cousin was selling off pieces of my future like they were his to give away. But here's the thing that kept me awake at night once I learned the truth. My grandmother knew. She knew someone would try to steal it. She knew I'd be alone. And she left me something more powerful than land. She left me proof. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. My name is Lucas, and for most of my life I believed I was nobody. I grew up in St. Catherine's Home for Children, a place that smelled like old wood and boiled vegetables, where the walls were painted the color of rain and the windows were too high for small hands to reach. I arrived there when I was 6 years old, the year my mother died in a car accident and my father, a man I have no memory of, was already long gone. They told me I had no one. They told me the state would take care of me. They told me to be grateful. So I was. I kept my head down, did my chores, and tried not to hope too much, because hope in a place like that could break you faster than loneliness. I watched other kids get adopted, watched them pack their things into garbage bags with smiles so big they looked like they might split in half, and I'd wave goodbye from the window, knowing my turn would never come. By the time I was 16, I had stopped wishing. I had stopped imagining a family waiting somewhere beyond the gates. I had convinced myself that this was all there was, and maybe that was okay. Maybe some people were just meant to be forgotten. But I wasn't forgotten. I just didn't know it yet. Somewhere far away, in a valley I had never seen, there was a ranch that stretched across 900 hectares of rolling grass and ancient oak trees, a place my ancestors had built with their hands and protected with their lives. My grandmother, Eleanor, had lived there alone for the last decade of her life, tending to horses and walking the fence line every morning like a queen surveying her kingdom. I have only 3 memories of her. One is the smell of lavender and wood smoke. Another is the softness of her hand on my head the day my mother's funeral ended. The third is her voice, low and firm, telling me I was strong, that I came from strong people, and that I should never let anyone make me believe otherwise. I was 6. I didn't understand what she meant. And then she was gone too, and I went to the orphanage, and the world moved on without me. What I didn't know, what nobody told me, was that before she died, Eleanor had made a will. She left everything to me. The house, the land, the barn, the equipment, all of it. But there was a condition. I couldn't claim it until I turned 18 and officially left the orphanage system. It was her way of protecting me, I think, making sure I was old enough to understand what I had, old enough to fight for it if I had to. But that condition also left a gap, a window of time where the ranch sat waiting, unclaimed, and someone else saw an opportunity. That someone was Daniel, my cousin, my grandmother's other grandson, the one she didn't trust. I didn't know Daniel existed until much later, but apparently he knew about me. He knew about the will. He knew about the ranch. And the moment Eleanor was buried, he started moving. I imagine him now, standing at her graveside with his hands folded, his face solemn, shaking hands with the preacher and the neighbors, playing the part of the grieving family member. Maybe he even cried. Maybe he was good at it. But behind that mask, his mind was working, calculating, planning. He hired a lawyer, not the one Eleanor had used, but a different one, someone who didn't ask too many questions. He forged documents that claimed Eleanor had changed her mind before she died, that she had transferred temporary management of the ranch to him until I came of age. He bribed a county clerk to backdate the paperwork. He told everyone in town that he was looking after the property for his little cousin, the poor boy in the orphanage who couldn't take care of it himself. People believed him. Why wouldn't they? He looked the part. Clean cut, well-spoken, respectful. He planted flowers on Eleanor's grave every month. He attended church. He smiled. And while I sat in a classroom learning long division and struggling to read books that were falling apart, Daniel sold the ranch. Not all of it at once. That would have raised questions. No, he was smarter than that. He leased parcels to local farmers. He sold timber rights to a logging company. He rented the main house to a family from the city who wanted a taste of country life. Piece by piece, he dismantled my inheritance, and every time someone asked if Lucas, knew what was happening, Daniel would shake his head sadly and say, "It's better this way. He's just a kid. He wouldn't understand. I'm doing this for him." And people nodded. People always nod when you say you're helping someone who isn't there to speak for themselves. I turned 18 on a Tuesday in March. There was no cake, no candles, no party. Miss Brennan, the orphanage director, called me into her office that morning and told me I had 2 weeks to find a place to live. That's how it worked. You aged out, and they moved you out, because there were always younger kids who needed the beds. She handed me a folder with my birth certificate, my school records, and a pamphlet about job training programs. She shook my hand. She wished me luck. And that was it. 18 years summarized in a handshake and a pamphlet. I packed my things into a duffel bag I'd been given by a charity drive 3 years earlier. I didn't have much. Some clothes, a few books, a notebook I used to write in when the nights felt too long, and a photograph, the one of my grandmother. It was in a wooden frame, old and scratched, with a little latch on the back. I'd kept it on the shelf beside my bed for as long as I could remember. It was the only thing I had that proved I came from somewhere, that I had belonged to someone once. I left St. Catherine's on a gray morning with my bag slung over my shoulder and no idea where I was going. I had a little money saved from a part-time job I'd worked at a grocery store, bagging groceries and stacking shelves, enough for maybe a week in a cheap motel, if I was careful. I stood outside the orphanage gates for a long time, staring back at the building that had been my entire world. I should have felt something, I thought. Relief, sadness, fear, anything. But I felt hollow, like a door that had been closed so many times it didn't remember what it was like to be open. I turned away and started walking. I ended up in a town called Ridgemont, about 30 miles south, because the bus fare was cheap and I'd heard there were jobs at a meatpacking plant. I rented a room in a boarding house that smelled like cigarettes and mildew, paid for a week up front, and spent the next few days trying to figure out how to be an adult when no one had ever taught you how. I got the job at the plant. It was hard, cold, bloody work, but it paid enough to keep me fed and sheltered, and that was all I needed. I told myself this was life now. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. No dreams, no plans, just survival. And for a while, that was enough. But one night, about a month after I left the orphanage, I was lying on the sagging mattress in my rented room, staring at the water-stained ceiling, when I noticed something strange about the photograph frame. I'd been looking at it every night before I went to sleep, the way some people look at old letters or pray. It was a ritual, a way of reminding myself that I hadn't always been alone. But that night, the light from the street lamp outside hit the frame at an angle, and I saw it. A thin gap along the back panel, almost invisible, like the wood had split or been pried open. I sat up and turned the frame over in my hands. The latch was old and stiff, but when I worked it loose and slid the back panel off, something fell into my lap. An envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax that had cracked but not broken. My name was written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. Lucas. Just that. No last name, no address. I stared at it for a long time, my heart beating faster than it should have. I don't know why I was afraid to open it. Maybe because I knew, somehow, that whatever was inside would change everything. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, folded carefully, written in the same looping handwriting. The ink was faded in places, but the words were clear. My dearest Lucas, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are finally free. I have thought about you every day since they took you away. I fought to keep you, But the law said I was too old, too frail, that you needed a younger family, a better chance. They didn't understand that you were my family, that this ranch was your birthright, that I would have given everything to keep you here with me. But they wouldn't listen. So I did the only thing I could. I made sure that when you were old enough, when you were strong enough, you would have what is yours. I have left you the ranch, Lucas. All 900 hectares. The house, the land, the water, everything. But you must know this. There are people who will try to take it from you. People who believe they deserve it more, who think that because you are not here, you have no claim. Do not believe them. You are my blood. You are my legacy. And I have made preparations. The letter went on. It explained that Eleanor had hired a lawyer, a man named Victor Gaines, who had been instructed to hold the original will and all supporting documents until I turned 18. It explained that the ranch was not just land, that beneath the soil there were water rights and mineral deposits, rare earth elements that a private company had been quietly leasing for years, generating income that was supposed to be held in trust for me. It explained that Eleanor had suspected someone in the family would try to interfere, and so she had created a second set of documents, legal proof that any transfer of ownership without my consent was fraudulent and void. She had thought of everything. She had protected me even when I didn't know I needed protecting. And at the bottom of the letter, in bold underlined script, she had written, "Do not let them steal your future. Fight, Lucas. Fight the way I taught you to." I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat in the dark, holding it, trying to process what it meant. I had a ranch. I had land. I had an inheritance worth more than I could imagine. But I also had a cousin who had stolen it, who had lied and forged and bribed his way into ownership, and who probably thought I would never find out. The letter included an address for Victor Gaines, a law office in a city 200 miles north. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Not the hot, reckless kind, but the cold, steady kind that settles into your bones and doesn't let go. Someone had taken what was mine. Someone had looked at a boy with nothing and decided to take even that. And my grandmother, the woman I barely remembered, had known it would happen and had given me the tools to fight back. The next morning, I called in sick to work, packed my bag, and bought a bus ticket north. The ride took 6 hours, winding through hills and farmland and small towns that all looked the same. I spent the whole time reading and rereading the letter, memorizing every word, every detail, like I was preparing for battle. When I finally arrived in the city, I asked for directions to the law office and walked there through streets that felt too big, too loud, too full of people who all seemed to know where they were going. The office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building with creaky stairs and a door that had Victor Gaines, attorney at law, painted on the frosted glass. I stood outside for a moment, gathering my courage, then knocked. A voice called from inside. "Come in." I opened the door and stepped into a cluttered office filled with filing cabinets, stacks of paper, and the smell of old coffee. Behind a desk sat a man who looked to be in his 60s, with thinning gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a tired but kind face. He looked up at me, and for a moment he seemed confused, like he was trying to place me. Then his eyes widened. "Lucas," he said. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. I nodded, and he stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "My God," he said, "I've been waiting for you for 12 years. He came around the desk and shook my hand, and I could feel his hands trembling. "Sit, sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. I did, and he sat back down, staring at me like I was a ghost. "Your grandmother," he said. "Eleanor. She came to me a month before she died. She knew she didn't have much time. She knew you were in the orphanage, and she knew someone would try to take the ranch. She made me promise, Lucas. She made me promise that when you turned 18, I would find you and give you everything she'd prepared. I tried. I called the orphanage. I sent letters. But they told me you'd aged out, that they didn't have a forwarding address. I thought I'd lost you." I pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. He read it, nodding slowly. And when he finished, he looked at me with something like awe. She hid this in the photograph frame, he said. Of course she did. She always said you were clever, that you'd figure it out. He stood up again and went to one of the filing cabinets, pulled out a thick folder, and brought it back to the desk. Inside were documents, so many documents. The original will, signed and notarized. Property deeds. Financial statements showing the income from the mineral leases, over $2 million held in trust. And a report compiled by a private investigator Eleanor had hired, detailing every fraudulent action Daniel had taken. The forged signatures, the bribed official, the illegal sales. It was all there. Everything we needed. Victor looked at me seriously. Your cousin, he said. Daniel. He's committed multiple felonies. Fraud, forgery, bribery, theft. If we take this to court, he won't just lose the ranch. He'll go to prison. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Good, I said. Victor nodded. Then let's begin. The next few weeks were a blur. Victor filed an emergency injunction to freeze all transactions related to the ranch. He contacted the county clerk's office and presented the evidence of bribery, which triggered an internal investigation. He reached out to the families and companies Daniel had sold to, informing them that the sales were fraudulent and would be voided. And then he filed a lawsuit against Daniel, on my behalf, seeking full restitution, damages, and criminal charges. Daniel's lawyer tried to fight it at first. They claimed the documents were fake, that Eleanor had been senile, that I was just a disgruntled kid trying to scam my way into money. But the evidence was overwhelming. The handwriting experts confirmed Eleanor's signature on the original will. The investigators' report was airtight. And when the county clerk, a man named Raymond Trask, was offered immunity in exchange for his testimony, he confessed everything. He admitted that Daniel had paid him $15,000 to backdate the transfer documents. He admitted that he'd known it was illegal, but had done it anyway because Daniel had promised him more money down the line. The case fell apart. By the time we got to court, Daniel had stopped pretending. He sat at the defendant's table with his head down, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear, but there was nothing they could do. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s with no patience for liars, listened to the evidence, reviewed the documents, and made her ruling. The ranch and all associated assets were to be returned to me immediately. All sales, leases, and transfers made by Daniel were voided. He was ordered to repay every cent he'd taken, plus damages. And then, she referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Daniel was arrested in the courtroom. I watched as they put the handcuffs on him, and he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. There was no anger in his eyes, just defeat, just the hollow realization that he'd been caught. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. They led him away, and I sat there in the silent courtroom, trying to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something quieter, something like justice. Victor drove me to the ranch the next day. It was a 3-hour drive through winding country roads, past fields of wildflowers and rivers that sparkled in the afternoon sun. We didn't talk much. I think he understood that I needed the silence, the space to prepare myself for what I was about to see. When we finally turned onto the long gravel driveway that led to the main house, I felt my chest tighten. The gate was open, rusted but still standing, with the name carved into the wooden arch above it. Hawthorne Ranch. My grandmother's name. My name now. The driveway stretched for almost a mile, lined with oak trees so old their branches formed a tunnel overhead. And then, there it was. The house. It was bigger than I'd imagined. 2 stories, whitewood siding that had faded to gray, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs still sitting where someone had left them. The windows were dark, some of them cracked, and the paint was peeling in places, but it was still beautiful. It was still standing. Victor stopped the car in front of the porch, and I got out slowly, like I was afraid the ground might disappear beneath me. The air smelled like grass and earth and something sweet I couldn't name. I walked up the porch steps, and they creaked under my weight. The front door was locked, but Victor had brought the keys. He handed them to me without a word. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Inside, the house was dim and dusty, filled with furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the walls, the tables, the door frames. In the kitchen, there were still dishes in the sink, like someone had left in the middle of breakfast and never come back. In the living room, there was a fireplace with framed photographs on the mantel. I picked one up and wiped the dust away. It was my grandmother, younger, standing next to a man I assumed was my grandfather, both of them smiling in front of this very house. And beside them, a little girl, my mother. I traced my finger over her face and felt something crack open inside me. I spent the rest of the day walking the property. Victor stayed by the car, giving me space. The ranch stretched out in every direction, rolling hills covered in tall grass that swayed in the wind like waves. There were horses in the far pasture, wild now. No one had tended them in years. There was a barn with a collapsed roof and equipment rusting in the yard. There was a creek that ran along the eastern edge, clear and cold. And everywhere I looked, I saw the life my grandmother had built, the life she had wanted me to have. I walked for hours, until the sun started to set and the sky turned orange and pink. I ended up on a hill overlooking the valley, the house small in the distance, and I stood there with the letter in my hand. The wind tugged at the paper, and I held it tighter. I wasn't crying, but my eyes were burning. I thought about the boy I had been, the one who believed he was nobody. I thought about the years I'd spent in that orphanage, folding clothes and eating watery soup and watching other kids leave. I thought about Daniel, sitting in a cell somewhere, realizing too late that he'd underestimated me. And I thought about Eleanor, the woman who had loved me enough to fight for my future, even when I didn't know she existed. I whispered into the wind, "Thank you." I don't know if she heard me. I don't know if it matters. But I said it anyway. And then I walked back down the hill, toward the house, toward the life I was just beginning to understand was mine. Victor was waiting by the car, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I looked back at the house, at the land, at the sky turning dark. Home. I'd never had one before. Not really. But I did now. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go home." And as we drove away, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Lights in the windows of a neighboring property, smoke rising from a chimney. People. I wasn't alone out here. There were others, families, workers, people who had known my grandmother, who had known this land. And tomorrow, I would meet them. Tomorrow, I would start learning what it meant to be the owner of Hawthorne Ranch. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in the house my grandmother had left me and feel, for the first time in my life, like I belonged somewhere. The next morning, I woke up on the floor of the living room, wrapped in an old blanket I'd found in a closet, sunlight streaming through the cracked windows. My whole body ached from sleeping on the hard wood, but I didn't care. I'd slept in worse places. I sat up and looked around the room, really looked at it in the daylight. The furniture under the sheets was solid, handmade, the kind that lasts generations. There were bookshelves filled with old novels and farming manuals. There was a piano in the corner, covered in dust, with sheet music still sitting on the stand. And everywhere, there were signs of life interrupted. A knitting basket with yarn still in it. A pair of boots by the door. A jacket hanging on a hook. It was like my grandmother had just stepped out and would be back any moment. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, and that's when I heard it. A knock at the door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. Victor had said he'd come back in a few days to help me sort through the legal paperwork, but this was too soon. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I walked to the door and opened it slowly. Standing on the porch was a man, maybe in his 50s, with weathered skin and calloused hands, wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap. He looked at me with surprise and suspicion. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice wasn't unfriendly, just cautious. "I'm Lucas," I said. "Eleanor's grandson." His expression changed immediately. Shock, recognition, something close to relief. "Lucas," he repeated. "My God. We didn't know if you'd ever come." He stepped back and looked me up and down. "You look just like her. Same eyes." He stuck out his hand. I'm Robert. I run the livestock operation next door. Your grandmother and I, we were neighbors for 30 years. I shook his hand, and his grip was firm, strong. I don't know what to say, I admitted. I just found out about all this a few weeks ago. Robert nodded slowly. We heard, he said. Heard about Daniel too. About what he did. He shook his head. I never trusted that boy. Always something slippery about him. Your grandmother, she knew. She told me once, she said, Robert, if anything happens to me, you look out for Lucas. You make sure he gets what's his. I told her I would. I felt a lump in my throat. She talked about me, I asked. Robert smiled. All the time. She'd sit on this porch and tell me stories about you when you were little. How you used to chase the chickens. How you'd fall asleep in the hayloft. She loved you, kid. More than anything. I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded, afraid that if I tried to speak I'd start crying. Robert seemed to understand. Listen, he said. You're going to need help getting this place back in shape. The fences are down. The barn needs work. And those horses out there, they're half wild now. But I've got some guys who can help. We'll get you sorted. You don't have to do this alone. I looked at him, this stranger who was offering me kindness I didn't know how to accept, and I managed to say, thank you. He clapped me on the shoulder. Come on, he said. Let me show you around. Let me show you what you've got here. We spent the rest of the morning walking the property. Robert pointed out where the fence lines used to run, where the irrigation system still worked, and where it needed repair, where the old cattle pens were, and where we could build new ones. He showed me the water source, a natural spring that fed into the creek, and explained that this was one of the most valuable things on the property. Water rights, he said. In this part of the country, water is worth more than gold. Your grandmother knew that. She protected it. And then he showed me something I hadn't seen the day before. At the far edge of the property, near a line of trees, there was a small building, half hidden by overgrown grass. What's that? I asked. Robert glanced at it, and then at me. That's the old survey station, he said. Back in the day, your great-grandfather had geologists come out here. They found something under the ground. Rare earth minerals. The kind they use in electronics, batteries, all that modern stuff. Your grandmother leased the extraction rights to a company out of Denver. They pay quarterly. It's been sitting in a trust account for you all these years. I stared at the building, trying to wrap my head around what he was saying. How much? I asked. Robert shrugged. I don't know the exact numbers, but last I heard, it was bringing in about $50,000 a quarter. Maybe more now. I did the math in my head. $200,000 a year. For 12 years. That was over $2 million, just sitting there, waiting for me. And Daniel had known. He'd known about the water, the minerals, the money. That's why he'd fought so hard to take it. That's why he'd lied and forged and bribed. Because this wasn't just a ranch. This was a fortune. We walked back to the house in silence. When we reached the porch, Robert turned to me. You're going to be okay, kid, he said. It's going to be hard, and there's a lot to learn, but you've got good land and good people around you. And you've got your grandmother's blood. That counts for something. He tipped his hat and started to leave, then stopped and looked back. One more thing, he said. There's a town meeting next week. Everyone's going to want to meet you. Word's already spreading that Eleanor's grandson is back. People are curious. Some of them are happy. Some of them, well, they did business with Daniel. They're not going to be thrilled that those deals are void. Just be ready for that. I nodded. I will be. He smiled. Good. See you around, Lucas. And then he was gone, walking back across the field toward his own property. I stood on the porch for a long time after he left, looking out at the land that was mine, trying to understand how my life had changed so completely in such a short time. A month ago, I'd been nobody, a kid with nothing, going nowhere. And now I was the owner of a 900-hectare ranch, with water rights and mineral deposits and a house full of memories. I was someone. I mattered. And people were watching. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter from my grandmother spread out in front of me, along with all the documents Victor had given me. I read through everything again, slower this time, making sure I understood every detail. The will was ironclad. The trust account was legally mine. The mineral lease was valid for another 20 years. Everything Daniel had tried to steal was back in my hands. But as I read, I started to notice something else. There were names in the documents, people and companies Daniel had dealt with. Some of them I didn't recognize, but others I did, because Robert had mentioned them. A logging company that had clear-cut part of the northern section. A real estate developer who'd tried to buy the land near the creek. A local businessman who'd leased grazing rights and then subleased them to someone else at a markup. All of these people had paid Daniel, and now those deals were void, which meant they'd lost money, which meant they were going to be angry. And some of them, I was starting to realize, were powerful. I thought about what Robert had said. The town meeting. People wanting to meet me. I understood now that it wasn't just curiosity. It was a test. They wanted to see if I was strong enough to hold on to what was mine, or if I was just a kid they could push around. I looked down at the letter again, at my grandmother's handwriting. Fight, Lucas. Fight the way I taught you to. I didn't remember her teaching me anything. But maybe she had. Maybe just by surviving, by making it this far, I'd already learned the most important lesson. How to keep going when the world tells you to give up. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my pocket, right over my heart. Then I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark hills. Somewhere out there, Daniel was sitting in a cell, probably wondering how it all went wrong. Somewhere out there, people were talking about me, planning, scheming, trying to figure out how to get what they wanted. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because I had something they didn't. I had the truth. I had proof. And I had a promise to keep. Not to myself. To her. To the woman who had loved me enough to make sure I'd have a future, even when I thought I had none. The town meeting was held in the community center, a low brick building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs set up in rows. I arrived early, wearing the only clean shirt I owned, my hands shoved in my pockets to hide the fact that they were shaking. People were already there, standing in small groups, talking in low voices. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, and I felt like I was back in the orphanage, standing in front of the other kids on my first day, wondering if anyone would talk to me or if I'd be invisible. But I wasn't invisible anymore. A woman approached me first. She was older, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and sharp eyes that looked me over like she was appraising livestock. "You're Eleanor's boy," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I'm Lucas." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Margaret Hale. I own the feed store in town. Your grandmother and I did business for years. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said, even though I didn't believe her. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "I heard about what happened with your cousin," she said. "Terrible business. But you should know, some of the deals he made, people are counting on those. Good people. Honest people. If you're planning to undo everything, it's going to cause problems." I met her gaze. "The deals were illegal," I said calmly. "They're void. That's not my decision. That's the law." Her smile disappeared. She straightened up and stepped back. "Well," she said coldly, "I hope you know what you're doing, boy." And then she walked away. I watched her go, and I realized this was how it was going to be. Not everyone was going to welcome me back. Not everyone was going to be happy that I'd taken back what was mine. Some of them were going to fight. The meeting started a few minutes later. The mayor, a man named Carl Jensen, stood at the front and called for order. He was in his 60s, with a round face and a politician's smile. He welcomed everyone, made a few announcements about road repairs and school funding, and then he cleared his throat. "Now," he said, "I know there's been some talk about the Hawthorne Ranch situation. I think it's important we address this head-on." He gestured toward me. "Lucas, would you mind standing up?" Every eye in the room turned to me. I stood, my legs unsteady, and the mayor smiled. "For those who don't know, this is Lucas Hawthorne, Eleanor's grandson. He's recently come into ownership of the ranch, and I think we all want to welcome him to the community." There was scattered applause, but it was thin, uncertain. Some people clapped. Others just stared. I sat back down, and the mayor continued. "Now, there's been some confusion about land deals and contracts. I want to assure everyone that we're working with the county to sort this out. But I also want to remind everyone that the law is the law, and we have to respect that, even when it's inconvenient. A man in the back stood up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a red face and a voice that carried. "That's easy for you to say, Carl," he said. "You didn't lose $50,000 because some kid shows up with a piece of paper." The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some agreeing, some arguing. I sat frozen, unsure what to do. The mayor raised his hands. "Please," he said, "let's keep this civil." The man pointed at me. "That kid's grandmother was senile," he said. "Everyone knew it. And now he's coming in here, waving a will that's probably fake, and we're just supposed to accept it? That's not how this works." I felt my face get hot. I stood up again, and the room went quiet. "The will isn't fake," I said. My voice was louder than I expected. "It's been verified by 3 separate handwriting experts. It's been upheld in court. And every deal my cousin made was based on forged documents. If you lost money, it's because you did business with a criminal, not because of me." The man's face got redder. "You calling me a criminal?" "No," I said. "I'm calling Daniel a criminal. You were just unlucky. Or maybe you didn't do your due diligence." That got a few laughs, but not many. The man sat down, muttering under his breath. The mayor stepped in quickly. All right, he said. "I think we've heard enough for tonight. Lucas, if you have questions or need help navigating any of this, feel free to reach out. My office is always open." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The meeting broke up slowly, people filing out in groups, some of them glancing back at me with expressions I couldn't read. Curiosity, resentment, calculation. I stayed in my seat until most of them were gone, then stood and walked toward the exit. That's when someone stepped in front of me, blocking my path. It was a younger man, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair and eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of Daniel. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm Marcus," he said, "Daniel's younger brother. Your other cousin." I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't known Daniel had a brother. Nobody had mentioned him, not Victor, not Robert, not anyone. Marcus must have seen the surprise on my face because his smile widened. "Yeah," he said, "nobody talks about me much. I'm the one who left, who wanted nothing to do with the family drama. But I'm back now, and I think we need to talk." I wanted to walk past him, to leave and not look back, but something in his tone made me stop. "Talk about what?" I asked. Marcus glanced around, making sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "About what you're really dealing with," he said quietly. "You think Daniel acted alone? You think he just woke up one day and decided to steal a ranch?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Kid, you have no idea how deep this goes. My grandmother left everything to me," I said firmly. "The court ruled in my favor. It's over." Marcus shook his head. "The court case is over," he said. "But the people Daniel owed money to, the ones he made promises to, they don't care about court rulings. And some of them are dangerous." He paused, letting that sink in. "I came back because I heard you won. I came back to warn you. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone in this town is happy you're here, and some of them will do more than just complain at town meetings." Before I could respond, he walked away, disappearing into the parking lot. I stood there for a long moment, his words echoing in my head. Was he trying to scare me, or was he telling the truth? I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me as I drove back to the ranch that night. The house felt different when I walked in, less like a sanctuary and more like a place I needed to defend. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and lay awake in the darkness, listening to every creak and groan of the old structure. Sleep didn't come easy. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Robert came by with 2 of his ranch hands, and we started working on the fences. It was hard, physical labor, the kind that left my hands blistered and my back aching, but it felt good. It felt purposeful. We didn't talk much while we worked, just the occasional instruction or observation, and I was grateful for that. I needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. But the peace didn't last. On the 4th day, I found something that made my blood run cold. I was walking the northern section of the property, checking the fence line we'd repaired, when I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud near the tree line. Someone had been here recently, and they'd driven deep into the property, far past where any casual visitor would go. I followed the tracks until they ended at the old survey station, the building where the mineral assessments had been done decades ago. The door was ajar, and when I pushed it open, I saw that someone had been inside. Papers were scattered across the floor, old filing cabinets had been pried open, and there were fresh boot prints in the dust. I pulled out my phone and called Victor immediately. "Someone broke into the survey station," I said when he answered. "They were looking for something." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Don't touch anything," Victor said. "I'm calling the sheriff. Stay there and wait for them." I did as he said, standing outside the building, my heart pounding. Within 30 minutes, a sheriff's deputy arrived, a young woman named Officer Hayes who took my statement and photographed the scene. She was professional, thorough, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "This is the second break-in we've had in the county this month," she said, "both on properties with mineral rights. We think someone's trying to figure out which land is worth targeting. Have you had any threats, any suspicious contact?" I thought about Marcus and his warning, but I wasn't sure if that counted. "Not directly," I said, "but someone told me to be careful. That not everyone is happy I'm here." Officer Hayes nodded. "That's probably true," she said. "When money's involved, people get desperate. I'll increase patrols in this area, but you should consider installing security cameras, maybe getting a dog. You're isolated out here, and that makes you vulnerable." After she left, I stood on the porch of the main house, looking out at the land that was supposed to be my future, and for the first time since I'd won the court case, I felt truly afraid. Not afraid of losing the ranch, the law was on my side there, but afraid of what people might do outside the law. That night, I called Robert and told him what had happened. He came over within the hour, bringing a shotgun and a box of shells. "I know you probably don't know how to use this," he said, setting it on the kitchen table, "but I'm going to teach you. And I'm going to teach you tonight." We spent the next 2 hours in the field behind the house, Robert showing me how to load, aim, and fire. The recoil bruised my shoulder, and the noise made my ears ring, but by the end of the lesson, I could hit a target consistently. "This doesn't mean you go looking for trouble," Robert said as we walked back to the house. "But if trouble comes to you, you need to be able to protect yourself. I'm not going to let what happened to Eleanor happen to you." "What do you mean?" I asked. "What happened to her?" Robert's face darkened. "Your grandmother didn't just die of old age, Lucas," he said quietly. "She had a heart attack, yeah, but it came right after a nasty confrontation with Daniel. He'd shown up at the ranch, demanding she sign over some of the mineral rights. She refused, and they argued. Neighbors heard the shouting. The next morning, she was gone. The doctor said it was natural causes, stress-induced, but I always wondered. I think that fight killed her, and I think Daniel knew it." I felt a cold rage settle over me, different from anything I'd felt before. Daniel hadn't just stolen from me. He'd killed my grandmother, maybe not with his hands, but with his greed, his cruelty. And now he was in prison, but that didn't feel like enough. It would never be enough. The following week, Victor called with news. "The district attorney wants to add another charge," he said. "Elderly abuse. If we can prove Daniel's confrontation with Eleanor directly contributed to her death, he could face additional prison time. Do you want to pursue it?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want him to pay for everything he did." "Good," Victor said. "I'll start gathering the evidence. We'll need witness statements, medical records, everything we can find. This won't be easy, Lucas, but if we succeed, Daniel won't see the outside of a prison cell for a very long time." As the weeks turned into months, life on the ranch began to find a rhythm. I hired a couple of workers to help with the repairs, young guys from town who needed the work and didn't care about the politics. We fixed the barn, cleared the overgrown fields, and brought in a veterinarian to check on the horses. Slowly, the place started to look like it had in the old photographs, alive and cared for. Robert became a constant presence, teaching me everything he knew about ranching, about the land, about the community. He introduced me to the people who had been loyal to my grandmother, the ones who remembered her kindness and respected what she'd built. And gradually, I started to feel less like an outsider and more like I belonged. But the threats didn't stop entirely. There were small things, a gate left open that should have been closed, equipment that went missing and then turned up damaged, anonymous letters left in my mailbox warning me to sell the ranch and leave while I still could. Officer Hayes kept investigating, but she never found enough evidence to make an arrest. Whoever was behind it was careful, methodical. Then, one evening in late autumn, Marcus showed up at my door again. I almost didn't let him in, but something about the way he looked, tired, worried, made me reconsider. "What do you want?" I asked. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About Daniel. About why he really wanted this ranch." I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room, the same room where my grandmother's furniture still sat under white sheets, and Marcus told me a story I hadn't heard before. Daniel wasn't just greedy, he said. He was in debt. Serious debt. He'd gotten involved with some people, investors, they called themselves, but they were more like loan sharks. They'd fronted him money to start a development company, and he'd promised them huge returns. But the company failed, and he owed them over $300,000. That's when he found out about the ranch, about the minerals, about how much it was really worth. He saw it as his way out. He figured if he could control the land, he could leverage the mineral rights, pay off his debts, and still have plenty left over. But it didn't work out that way. The court case froze everything, and now those people, the investors, they're coming after him. And they're starting to look at you. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would they look at me? I asked. Because you're the one who has what they think they're owed, Marcus said. In their minds, Daniel made a deal using assets he claimed to control. Now that the assets are yours, they think you should honor that deal. It's twisted logic, but these aren't reasonable people. I've heard they've been asking questions, trying to figure out how to get to you. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process this. So what do? I asked. Marcus shrugged. You could pay them off, he said, by your safety. Or you could go to the police, tell them everything, and hope they can protect you. Or, and he paused, looking at me seriously, you could fight back. You could make it clear that you're not someone they can intimidate. That if they come after you, you'll come after them twice as hard. That's what Eleanor would have done. I thought about my grandmother, about the woman Robert had described, strong, stubborn, unwilling to back down. I thought about the letter she'd left me, the one that told me to fight. And I realized that running, hiding, paying off criminals, none of that was an option. Not if I wanted to keep this place. Not if I wanted to honor her memory. I stood up and looked at Marcus. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'll handle it. He nodded and stood as well. Be careful, Lucas, he said. These people don't play by the rules. And one more thing. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a list of names. The investors, the ones Daniel owed money to. If anything happens to me, make sure the police get this. I took the paper, my hand trembling slightly. Why would anything happen to you? I asked. Marcus smiled sadly. Because I'm the one who's been helping you, he said. I'm the one who told you the truth. And they don't like people who talk. He left before I could say anything else, disappearing into the night. I stood on the porch, watching his taillights fade down the driveway, and then I unfolded the paper. There were 5 names on it, along with phone numbers and addresses. I recognized one of them immediately. Margaret Hale, the woman from the town meeting, the one who owned the feed store. She was one of the investors. She was one of the people who wanted to get to me. The next morning, I drove into town and went straight to the sheriff's office. I asked to speak with Officer Hayes, and when she came out, I handed her the list. These are the people who invested in Daniel's company, I said. And according to my cousin Marcus, they're the ones behind the threats. Officer Hayes looked at the list, her expression growing serious. Where did you get this? She asked. From Marcus, I said. Daniel's brother. He warned me that they might come after me. Hayes nodded slowly. I'll look into this, she said. But Lucas, you need to understand, having debt to someone isn't a crime. Unless we can prove they've directly threatened you or committed a criminal act, there's not much we can do. Then I'll get you proof, I said. Just keep an eye on them. And keep an eye on me. I'm not going to let them scare me off my own land. Over the next 2 weeks, I became hypervigilant. I installed security cameras around the property, motion-activated lights, and I kept Robert's shotgun by the front door. I documented everything, every strange noise, every suspicious vehicle, every anonymous letter. And then, one night, my vigilance paid off. The cameras caught 2 men cutting through the fence on the eastern edge of the property, near the creek. They were dressed in dark clothes, faces partially covered, and they were heading straight for the main house. I called 911 immediately, then grabbed the shotgun and waited. I could hear them outside, moving around, testing the doors and windows. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Then I heard the sound of breaking glass, the back door. They were coming in. I moved into the hallway, the shotgun raised, and I called out in the strongest voice I could manage. "I know you're there," I shouted. "I've called the police, and I'm armed. Leave now, or I will defend my property." There was a moment of silence, and then I heard footsteps, fast, running. They were leaving. I stayed where I was, not moving, until I heard the sound of a vehicle speeding away. Only then did I lower the gun, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The police arrived 10 minutes later, Officer Hayes and 2 other deputies. They searched the property, collected evidence from the broken window and the cut fence, and took my statement. The security footage was clear enough to get a partial license plate, and Hayes promised they'd track it down. "You did good," she said. "You stayed calm. You didn't do anything reckless. We're going to find these people." 2 days later, they did. The vehicle belonged to a man on Marcus's list, one of the investors. When the police brought him in for questioning, he broke almost immediately, admitting that Margaret Hale had paid him to scare me, to make me think the ranch wasn't worth the trouble. She'd hoped I'd sell cheap, and then she and the other investors could buy it and recoup their losses through the mineral rights. It was conspiracy, attempted burglary, criminal intimidation. Margaret Hale was arrested, along with 2 of the other investors. The town was in shock. People who had known Margaret for years couldn't believe she'd been capable of something like this. But the evidence was overwhelming, and when the case went to trial, all 3 of them were convicted. The day the verdicts came in, I was standing on the porch of the ranch, watching the sun set over the hills. Victor called to give me the news, and I listened in silence as he told me about the prison sentences, the fines, the restitution I'd be awarded. When he finished, he said something that stuck with me. "You've won, Lucas," he said. "Not just the legal battles, but the real fight. You've proven that you belong there, that the ranch is yours, and that you're strong enough to protect it. Your grandmother would be proud." I thanked him and hung up, and then I just stood there, letting the weight of it all settle over me. I'd gone from being a boy with nothing, sleeping in an orphanage and believing I was forgotten, to a man who owned 900 hectares of land, who had faced down criminals and corrupt officials, who had fought for his inheritance and won. But more than that, I'd found something I'd never had before. A home, a purpose, a connection to the past, and a hope for the future. Robert came by that evening, and we sat on the porch together, not saying much, just watching the stars come out. "You did it, kid," he said finally. "You really did it." I nodded, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, and I felt grateful. For Victor, for Robert, for the letter my grandmother had left me. For all the people who had helped me when they didn't have to, who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. "The ranch is going to be okay now," Robert said. "And so are you." "I hope so," I said. "I want to make this place what it was, what she wanted it to be." "You will," Robert said. "You've got time, and you've got help. And you've got her blood. That's all you need." We sat in silence for a while longer, and then Robert stood to leave. Before he went, he turned back to me. "One more thing," he said. "Eleanor told me once that the ranch wasn't just about land or money. She said it was about legacy, about passing something down that mattered. You're that legacy now, Lucas. You're what she fought for. Don't ever forget that." "I won't," I said. "I promise." After he left, I walked back into the house and stood in the living room, looking at the photographs on the mantel. My grandmother, my grandfather, my mother. All of them gone now, but all of them still here in some way, in the walls of this house, in the soil of this land. I pulled the letter from my pocket, the one Eleanor had written, and I read it one more time. Do not let them steal your future. Fight, Lucas. Fight the way I taught you to. I folded it carefully and placed it back in the frame with her photograph, where it belonged. And then I whispered into the empty room, I fought, Grandma. I fought and I won. The next morning, I woke early and walked out to the hill where I'd stood that first day, the one that overlooked the entire valley. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the land stretched out before me, endless and beautiful. I thought about the boy I'd been, the one who had sat in an orphanage and believed he was nobody. And I thought about the man I was becoming, the one who had a home, a future, a reason to keep going. I wasn't that forgotten boy anymore. I was Lucas Hawthorne, owner of a 900-hectare ranch, grandson of Eleanor, a woman who had loved me enough to protect my future even when I didn't know I had won. And as I stood there, watching the sun rise over the land that was mine, I felt something I'd never felt before. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not the end of the fight, but the beginning of something new. I stayed there until the sun was fully up, the light warm on my face. And then I turned and walked back down the hill, toward the house, toward the life I was finally ready to live. And for the first time since I could remember, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was mine. And I was finally, truly home.